Welcome to There's Sometimes a Buggy, Irresponsible Opinions About Classic Film. I'm Elise.
I'm Dave. This week, it's our May special subject, Samuel Goldwyn, 1940s edition. We'll be discussing 4 films produced by the iconic Hollywood impresario: The Little Foxes, The Pride of the Yankees, The Best Years of Our Lives, and My Foolish Heart. After that, stay tuned for Fear and Moviegoing in Toronto, because TIFF Lightbox Powell and Pressburger retrospective is on. We've seen the first 3 films on the program: The Red Shoes, Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, and I Know Where I'm Going. We'll have a brief discussion of those toward the end of the cast.
Yeah, this was a wild weekend of movie watching.
It's true, that's 7 movies.
7 long movies.
We found the time, and now we're finding the time to discuss them with all of you. This is our second produced by Samuel Goldwyn special subject, so I don't think we're going to go too much into the Goldwyn biography here. Do check out our Samuel Goldwyn 1930s episode for a little biography on the man. I think here we're really going to have to devote ourselves exclusively to the movies. We'll do them chronologically, and we'll have Leonard Maltin along for the ride. Let's hear what he had to say about The Little Foxes, which came out in 1941. He gives it 3.5 stars out of a possible 4. Outstanding filmization of Lillian Hellman's play of greed and corruption within a Southern family on the financial outs, headed by Majestic Davis as Ruthless Regina. Colin Duria, Dingle, Carl Benton Reed, and John Marriott all recreate their Broadway roles, with Collinge, Duria, Reed, and Teresa Wright making their film debuts. There was a prequel made, he points out, Another Part of the Forest. I love that movie. The director was William Wyler, and the cast list: Betty Davis, Herbert Marshall, Teresa Wright, Richard Carlson, Patricia Collinge, Dan Duria, Charles Dingle. What are your feelings about The Little Foxes? This is one I think you know well.
Yes, I was obsessed with Betty Davis when I was a teenager.
Me too.
A few of her movies came on the channels I had available. I taped them on VHS, and I watched them over and over and over and over, and this was one of those. So I know, particularly when it comes to her performance, I know what's coming ahead of time. You may have noticed that when we were reviewing it. I was like, I love this bit, right? Yeah. It's really a very, very entertaining play, and the performances are so expert. Such an ensemble piece, particularly between the brothers and Betty Davis. It's very rare to see 3-way scenes in a Hollywood film.
Often a few other people involved in major or minor ways, maybe all of them wanting to slap Dan Duria.
Yeah, that's not the only 3-way scene. There's a few others, but they're particularly good together. The dynamics of the brothers and the sister. And everybody feels like they're playing a role and not like they're just being their star selves. I mean, in many cases, they didn't have a star self at that time, but this is definitely a very different Dan Duryea, for example,
well, yeah.
than he would become, despite that incredibly distinctive face and voice, than he would become in Hollywood.
This was his entree into Hollywood, and people didn't really know what kinds of amazing uses they could make of him in film noir. Film noir didn't really exist in 1941.
I think at the time I thought of this as a typical Herbert Marshall part because he's being
badgered,
bullied by a woman, and is very impotent. But no, it's a very distinctive, specific performance.
Well, he's certainly less of a fool in this movie than he is just a year earlier in The Letter, right, where he doesn't have a clue what's going on. In this one, he's just as much of a player in all the machinations, really. He can't get up and move around, but he's got more power than any of them, and that's very clear in the way things unfurl.
The play itself, I mean, it's good dramatically. It keeps your interest. It's entertaining. There's a lot of coup de théâtre. And again, the scenes that have many players in them are just expertly done, right? The interplay between the characters, which isn't that common a thing, even in theater. In theater, it's a lot of one-on-one scenes, even if there's a large cast. Davis's performance is flashy.
It is.
She may not be giving a Bette Davis star performance, but Regina herself is a kind of star.
Well, no doubt. In the Bette Davis canon, this one and her portrayal of Queen Elizabeth, I mean, you have to kind of think of them together to some extent.
Well, she's much more sympathetic playing Queen Elizabeth.
True, but
she's vulnerable, at least.
Bette Davis is vulnerable in this movie as well. I don't know if the play ends this way. Is this a little sop to Hollywood moralization? I don't know, but with her ending alone and clearly feeling the impact of the loss of her daughter, she looks really freaked out as the camera pulls away from this world.
Well, we can talk about that ending. I don't know if it is different in the play. I did read the play at the time, but that was a long time ago. And of course, Lillian Hellman herself adapted it, as Milton said. The filmization.
Yeah.
A term I've never heard before. So that starts to get at, for me, and I'm very interested to hear what you have to say about this, if your opinion is different, if your reaction is different. For me, the central dramatic problem with this play is that, although it's supposedly a harsh critique of capitalism, you absolutely want Regina to get what she wants. Absolutely want her to do whatever she has to do to Herbert Marshall so that she can get it. And some of that has to do with her being a woman and the fact that obviously she'd be a better businessman than her brothers if she had not been. The way that she has to go through her husband in order to do what she wants to with her money.
I don't think the two things are incompatible at all. The movie is clearly showing you a world in which this development, it's inevitable. Capitalism can't be beaten at the individual level the way Herbert Marshall is trying to at least soften the edges by not getting involved in a sweatshop. But if he doesn't back it, someone else will. And that's the point of the film. The reason that everything is lining up to have this happen is because wages are the lowest in the country, which the movie hammers home.
When he says to her, "We'll just sit back and watch your brothers grow rich," you want her to kill him right then. It's very Nietzschean too, right? The fact that this ultimately weak man, weak by these Randian capitalist terms, weak in body, weak in spirit, and yet, as long as he's alive, he has the power to stop her. For no reason, really.
Well, no, that's not true. I mean, from his perspective, he's doing something noble. He's doing what he can, but it's not going to undermine the capitalist system in any way, so he's just taking it out on her. Of course, she's been taking things out on... Everyone's taking everything out on everyone in this movie.
Marshall doesn't play it this way, but you could certainly play it, and it has the same effect as if he's personally getting revenge on her for their marriage.
Well, no, I think he does play it partly that way. I mean, he doesn't have to phrase it the way he does, as you just put it, right? I think the root of it goes beyond that. He really has been spending a lot of time thinking about his complicity in this monstrous system of exploitation. He's trying to limit his involvement with it during his dying days. He could just really strike sanctimonious poses, which he certainly does, but no, he goes way beyond that to twist the knife by reminding her what it's going to be like.
And the phrasing is perfect too, because it lets us know that this is not for her just about wanting to fulfill the fantasies that she had as a young woman, the ambitious materialist fantasies, but also having access to a greater world, a wider world.
From the beginning of the movie to the end, or to the end of her hopes anyway, she's talking about leaving, letting the money just make itself, and she and Zanny will be in Chicago, absorbing Northern culture and enjoying themselves for a change.
But it's not just about those things, it's also about competing with her brothers, because she feels, within herself, she feels the power to do that. She feels that she's their equal or better.
Well, she certainly is. And that's part of the fun that this movie is having with all of the characters. I mean, clearly Lillian Hellman doesn't mind torturing these people. The more powerful their personality is, the more they are suffering. Because Charles Dingle, I mean, he's the ultimate little fox, and he's not really punished at all.
The smarter brother, the one who has a good relationship with Regina. They actually like each other. They kind of respect each other.
Well, sort of, yeah. But I mean, he also doesn't have anything else in his life. So he has no weaknesses, really. There's nothing for people to chip away at.
He's a bachelor, and yeah, he seems to just live for his vicarious revenge on the aristocracy and to make money and to move the chess pieces.
Yeah, and of course, in another part of the forest, Lillian Hellman really gets into all of that, right? Because it's the origin story of the Hubbards, and it shows exactly how they took advantage of that aporia in the social system to displace the aristocracy.
So, as far as that goes, and the character of Birdie, how do you feel? I was really wondering about this, watching it on this viewing. How does this, the capitalists are so much worse critique fit into, whatever kind of social criticism Lillian Hellman is trying to do here? What's your opinion on that?
Well, again, there I think you have to go to another part of the forest, because there it shows that they're better.
So it's just Birdie she feels sorry for.
Yeah, Birdie is an object of pathos for sure, but I don't think this movie, she thinks, okay, well, things would be better if we'd go back to the antebellum days, but Lillian Hellman doesn't think that. Lillian Hellman is enough of a humanist to say, well, it's not Birdie's fault that the world is like this and that the feudal system has to be replaced by capitalism.
So really, we shouldn't think of her as tragic. We should think of her as she's pathetic.
She is pathetic, of course. It's such a great performance, too.
It's an incredible performance. Patricia Collinge's performance when I was a kid watching this movie. It's kind of the most adult thing in the movie because it is so painful. The scene where she's trying to warn Teresa Wright, who doesn't understand what she's talking about. Teresa Wright playing a very kind of Jamesian heroine, as she does in Shadow of a Doubt, who ultimately starts to understand and be conscious of the evil around her, where she's trying to warn Teresa Wright that she thinks the same fate has happened to her is being prepared for Teresa Wright, and they're going to force her to marry Dan Durier's character, her first cousin, who is like an absolute gormless idiot.
I even like Oscar more than Leo, she says.
And then her husband is literally waiting in the shadows, waiting behind a curtain, and we see his legs there. Nice Wyler moment. I don't know if he took that directly from the stage play, but anyway, it's a nice moment there. Waiting for this in the background, and then when he hits her, it's just more terrifying, like a 10 times more brutal act of domestic violence could not be as terrifying as that.
Yeah, I agree. She would go on in the 40s to give some other memorable performances, paired with Teresa Wright again in Shadow of a Doubt.
There's a scene where they are entertaining this investor.
Oh, the big capitalist from the north. High-toned company.
Ben, who in other contexts seems like the wisest of the siblings. In this context, he has no idea what he's doing. He's ruining the entire dinner.
The thing is, it's not possible to ruin it, and that's part of, I guess, what he sees. The high-toned company is just a ruthless capitalist, doesn't give a fuck about anything else. As he tells us, we're doing this deal because we're all going to make money. This is Exploitation City.
But Regina wants to be doing this, as does the capitalist. They both want to be doing this with finesse and manners, and Ben absolutely is not interested in that.
They both have a point. Regina wants to do it her way. This is about expanding her social horizon. For Ben, no, I mean, he loves being in the position that he's in, where he can now deal with the money people from up north and talk their language. And the guy from up north is totally flexible. He's happy to have a charming time with Bette Davis. But again, what she's doing doesn't influence him one way or another. He would have dealt with Ben either way, and he doesn't really care about the piano playing.
Also doesn't care about Ben's story about how they cleverly defeated the aristocrats and ground their daughter down into the dust.
No, of course he doesn't. He doesn't care about anything.
That's why Bette Davis keeps telling him to shut up.
She does, of course, because this is not conforming with her idea of how the evening should go. But I think it's a mistake to think of it as Ben potentially screwing it up. That's my perspective
He's
on
not
it.
screwing it up, he's being a boor.
Yeah, but again, capitalist doesn't mind dealing with a boor.
She does, though.
Yeah, because for her, this is about something else.
Sophistication.
Yeah.
Right? And then afterwards, when they're all having the discussion amongst themselves about how it went and how it's going to go and how she's going to get this money from Herbert Marshall by acting seductive, which Ben thinks is a good plan, then we see the fun she starts having with them.
Starts upping the percentage that is due her.
Interesting how Hellman plays this shell game, a shell game of who's the boor from scene to scene. Because in this next scene, suddenly Ben has finesse. Oscar absolutely does not and keeps objecting to this game that's going on between Ben and Regina.
Yeah, well, Oscar never has finesse. I mean,
He's almost as stupid, although more brutal, than his son.
The only advice he gives is for his son to stay awake at the bank, which he can't do.
And his only objective is to get Leo married to Teresa Wright, I guess because he has no other woman will take him? Like, no other decent woman will take him?
As everyone knows, and as Ben points out, he's never marrying. He's certainly intent on that. So all of his money is going to go to the offspring that were produced by his siblings. So you want to keep it in the family. It's all about keeping control in the family. That's what the marriage would be about.
Right. But Betty Davis is just having so much fun in this scene. I don't know much about these things. Maybe it would come out of your share, Oscar.
We know that's what's going to happen. It's sort of like in The Maltese Falcon, where everyone's deciding at the end, okay, well, we'll give you Wilmer. Wilmer's going to take the fall for this.
Of course, as soon as Herbert Marshall comes home, her seduction plan falls to pieces, and she starts being the boor. And nobody can be smooth. At every moment, somebody is failing to be as smooth as they need to be to make this deal go down.
Yeah, well, again, I think that's one of the most remarkable things about the movie and the performance. It's sort of set up as if she is some kind of Southern femme fatale. She's not at all, because she can't even for a moment put on any kind of an act that will convince Herbert Marshall that she has anything but contempt for him.
Yeah, and she's been waiting for this for far too long. She cannot wait another single moment.
And unfortunately, he's got a real bad heart problem.
Yeah, and then
he doesn't want to hear anything about this stuff.
And when she invites the brothers into the room, now she's the boor, because Ben's trying to get her to calm down, and is even feeling a little bit grossed out by the way that she's treating her invalid husband.
I don't know if he's grossed out. I just think he realizes it's not going to work this way. I think it's a practical objection.
Or at least he can afford to be grossed out in that moment.
She immediately starts in on him, and whatever dynamic they've had for the past 20 years reasserts itself, and it's awful.
Right. He has 30 seconds after he comes home of hoping.
But she moved him back into his old room next to her so that they can have sex, potentially.
Yeah, of hoping that, even though he knows better, clinging to the last shreds of delusion that she has some kind of feeling for him, other than contempt and hatred.
Right, but she does not.
What do you think of the side plot brewing between Alexandra and her young liberal gentleman?
Yeah, well, he's a journalist, muckraker. He wants to tear the lid off this town and expose the corruption and more hideous workings of capitalism that are operative everywhere. He has become friends, or he becomes fast friends with Herbert Marshall, who is a banker and has been part of all of this, but now regrets it. Both of them, they just dote on Teresa Wright, as, of course, who wouldn't? She's wonderful.
She's wonderful, but she's not morally conscious as the movie begins.
No. She has a bit of an arc, right? Because you start to see her verging on... She thinks when she is sent to Baltimore that she's on her own now and she should start acting like her mother and bossing people around and just being a difficult customer.
Being high-handed.
She learns this is probably not not the path that she should stay on.
Yeah, and also she just has to get out of denial and develop a moral awareness of what's going on around her.
And yeah, she does a good job of that. And 40s are going to be very good for Teresa Wright. This is almost a covert Teresa Wright special subject because 3 of the 4 films will feature her in increasingly interesting roles.
There's a fairly decent role for Jessica Grayson playing Addie, who's the main housekeeper.
With our usual disclaimer that even the best roles are still domestic roles at this time for African Americans. But yeah, she has quite a bit of scope for expressing herself at the very least.
Well, and I mean, it's just a substantial role, more substantial than you'll get often. She gets to take part in many of the ensemble scenes.
And John Marriott playing Cal came from the stage production, as Malton mentioned. His role isn't as large, but he's got a few little interesting moments as he and Herbert Marshall observe what's going on in this town. I like Richard Carlson as David Hewitt. He doesn't have a lot to do, but he's genuinely likable, I think.
I have always... I guess since the last time I saw this movie, which may have been in my 20s, misremembered the scene between Oscar and Leo in the bathroom as ending with Oscar smacking him.
Leo's always on the verge of getting smacked, and he always deserves it.
Oscar smacks him when he's got that cigar in his mouth.
Right, yeah.
Which is a great scene as well. In that scene, it's Leo who's the boor, and Oscar actually looks good compared to him, as Bertie says.
It's a low bar.
But yeah, and then we are concluding with the showdowns between Regina and Herbert Marshall, and I wonder if there's anyone, listeners, let us know. I wonder if there's anyone who cannot root for Regina in these scenes.
Well, I don't know if I root for her. You understand what's going on with her, and...
No, on a primal level, I identify with her simply as an abstract character who wants to get a thing and is being
thwarted.
Yeah, but thwarted in a specific way that makes you sympathetic with her.
Well, Herbert Marshall's just kind of turning into Bartleby.
It's because it would be so easy. It's just what she wants is so easy.
Just keep on being a banker for a little while longer. Use your money to make more money. That's what bankers are supposed to do. I've put all the deal together for you. All you have to do is let it happen, and he won't. But again, the movie does a decent job of showing you what's going on with Herbert Marshall, why he's doing it.
It's one thing to feel that what a character is doing is right, and then it's another thing to be in the position of identifying with a character who wants something. Couldn't help but keep thinking about Succession, right? That TV show again, watching this movie, and how you identify with terrible capitalists who are being arbitrarily thwarted in what they want.
One of the immortal scenes of cinema and part of the Goldwyn highlight reel, the way Wyler focuses on Regina's face as Herbert Marshall struggles up the stairs to get his second bottle of medicine, and he collapses and she times it just right so that she alerts the house. You could see that, she's not smiling. Right? It would be a totally different scene if she was villainously smiling while it was happening.
No.
She's worried, but she just needs to do this. She doesn't, and she tells him, she doesn't hate him. She doesn't really sit up nights thinking about killing him, but he's just being such an obstacle, he's got to go.
Well, she does tell him, I hope you die soon, I'll be waiting for you to die.
She does, but that's in the heat of an argument.
That's different.
It's not her usual mode. And you can see that in that scene because she's not reveling in it. She's really scared.
Well, no, what she's doing is feeling the weight of killing a person. It doesn't matter to her in that moment who the person is.
The scene would not be the same if Ben needed him to die, let's say, and Ben was standing there and Herbert Marshall was struggling up the stairs. You wouldn't see the complexity of emotions play on his face because he has no complexity, and Regina does.
No, but again, I just feel like it's the weight of killing a human being.
Right.
But she realizes this is what I have to do. And she's obviously weighing it. He's going to die very soon anyway. I just need him to die conveniently right now.
Right. I don't think Ben would even understand that part of the equation.
No, sure. So she has a tiny modicum of humanity left, in other words.
I don't know if I'd want to put it that way. It's just that she has aspirations to be a more fully fledged human being than her brothers do. That's why she's a more interesting character.
Maybe. I've never really thought of it that way.
And that's why her quandary is so much more interesting to us than whatever's going on with them.
But I also don't feel like it's this great moral sacrifice either. Like,
No.
how could you even play it that way?
No, but she certainly sees it as an ugly moment that she just has to live through. And maybe it's going to bear splendid fruit later on. Of course it doesn't, and she winds up alone in her room.
I remember when I first met film writer George Tolles, we discussed this scene in A&W, and I remember him saying that, this is how I remember it anyway, I'm not sure, but it was many, many years ago. But what I remember is him saying that she's rigidly forcing herself not to get up, like her human instincts, like this is the way Davis is playing it, her human instinct is to get up and help him, and she is forcefully repressing that.
Yeah, there's a real tension there. Wyler famously gets everything you possibly could and more out of that, with the help of his cameraman and the deep focus.
As far as the ending goes, as a child, well, a teenager with underdeveloped morals, I didn't buy the ending at all. I didn't buy, based on what we see of her relationship with her daughter, they might as well live on different planets. I didn't buy that this is going to be a huge regret for her at all. I also think I read that somewhere, that you shouldn't buy that in some book about old movies or Bette Davis. This time I noticed two things. One was that, and I'm not sure if I bought this, Teresa Wright is implying that she's going to be freaked out having to be alone in the house that night with her conscience. And Wyler has Davis play it as though, maybe they needed this for the code, as though she is freaked out. Although, if you did just kill your husband and you're about to spend the night in the house alone, it's true, you might be freaked out. You might actually be a little freaked out about your conscience that night. I'm not sure if I buy her as regretting the loss of her daughter that much. We don't really see or believe in much of a relationship there, other than...
Well, the plans.
But obviously the plan is her just telling herself that her daughter wants all the same things that she did, like just as if she's trying to take her own younger self to Chicago. Nothing to do with who Zanny actually is.
No, but I think that's what a lot of parent-child relationships are like, and they could still be painful.
I don't see enough of any kind of relationship, warm, cold, or lukewarm, between them in the film to base any regret that she might have on that. What is true is that if she's going to go off now to Chicago with no human ties, but she's facing the fact at the end of the movie that she has no human ties that she cares about at all. And that is going to make finally fulfilling her dreams a bit hollow.
I don't know if there was a perfect way to end this film and this story, but it's certainly an interesting one. Let's take a look at what Malton has to say about the pride of the Yankees. 4 stars out of a possible 4. Superb biography of baseball star Lou Gehrig, with Cooper giving excellent performance. Fine support from Teresa Wright as devoted wife. Truly memorable final sequence. Script by Joe Swerling and Herman J. Mankiewicz, with Oscar-winning editing by Daniel Mendel. The director, Sam Wood, who comes up a lot on our podcast. And the cast list: Gary Cooper, Teresa Wright, Babe Ruth, Walter Brennan, Dan Duria again, Ludwig Stossel, Addison Richards, Hardy Albright.
So most of these films that we're viewing this time were very successful for Goldwyn, particularly Pride of the Yankees and Best Years of Our Lives. My Foolish Heart was not.
A shame.
It would be hard to imagine two more tonally contrasting movies, particularly about America, than Pride of the Yankees and Best Years of Our Lives, but they were both enormous hits.
So what's your experience with Pride of the Yankees?
I think I've only seen it with you a couple of times. So in recent years, then?
I saw it, of course, when I was a kid, watched it fairly often.
Of course. But not of course.
Well, it played on TV, and I was, and still am, a baseball fan. Lou Gehrig was indeed a great player. The film, I do love it. I think it's the least of the 4 films that we watch, because it does get into hagiography a little bit too much, but I love watching it. I think Gary Cooper's excellent. The relationship with Teresa Wright is pretty unusual. I think the way to think of this movie is as a love story.
This movie has great screenwriters.
It does.
Joe Swerling and Herman Mankiewicz. I did look a little bit into the Gehrig biography. It seems likely that he really was as nice and as naive as the character is portrayed in this movie. His wife was indeed a socialite who, after his death, she devoted herself to his legacy. The stuff, it's very interesting because the stuff with the mother is loosely based on his actual biography, but in real life it was much more grim. It was actually very much being domineered by his mother, who wore the pants in the family, and escaping from that through meeting the Teresa Wright character later in life, and there being much greater conflict than we are shown between Teresa Wright and the mother. All of this stuff is there, it's just extremely sugar-coated.
Exactly. Some lessons were learned along the way, and everyone loves each other and gets along. The movie makes it seem like they were together much longer than they really were. I mean, they show her seeing him and insulting him on the day when he gets his first at-bat, which would have been in 1924 or something, which is not when they got married, right?
Wikipedia says his mother ruined all of Gehrig's romances until he met Eleanor Twitchell in 1932. They began dating the next year and married in September.
Right, okay. A good 7-8 years together before when he died in 41 or 42. I can't remember exactly when.
41, age 37.
Yeah, it's a great story. It's his wife's perspective.
Yes, on her Wikipedia page it says that she served as a consultant to the film and was paid $30,000 for her life rights.
It gives you more insight into her experience of those years than you'd expect from a film of this kind. It's just a wonderful role for Teresa Wright. They've got this teasing relationship at the beginning, which she gets a lot of mileage out of.
I thought that was a very sexually charged meet cute.
Tanglefoot.
Yeah, I mean, the expression she gets when he looks back at her, right?
Yeah.
I don't even know how to describe that expression, but it did seem very sexually charged. She's just mocking him, I guess, is the way to put it. But also kind of feeling a bit challenged by him.
She's interested right away in the progress of this weird rookie. And then they meet up again at the restaurant. And all their early courtship scenes, there's still that echo of the mocking tone that she had at the beginning. You know, when they're at the carnival, she gets really into the idea that maybe he's going to fail at winning one of the carnival games with the sledgehammer.
Well, Eleanor Twitchell was a socialite and had many beaux.
She felt free to associate with, you know, any man she was interested in, which makes her pretty cool. Not many women could at that time.
The movie makes that clear.
Yeah.
In their scenes together. One of the more interesting things about the movie is the use it makes of Gary Cooper's persona, which does seem to be a good fit for the part. Of course, he's way too old, but that's as it may be.
That's always...
It's always the case with the casting of men in movies, and often with women. Portraying that kind of innocent, but with realism. There's a lot of emotional weight to the performance. It's the same idea as his Capra performances, but it's not the same. Oddly enough, this is more realistic.
Yeah.
Despite the severe whitewashing of everything in the story.
I don't like this game anymore. I'm back from Detroit. That's one of my favorite lines when she asks him to pretend that he's in another city and they'll just think about what's going on. And she talks about all the men that she might be out with.
You know, he's naive, but he's not insuperably asexual, as he can come across in the Capra movies. And again, it does seem to be right for the real Lou Gehrig, that he obviously was having his sexuality thwarted by his mother for many, many years, and it took a long time for this to be teased out of him by one woman. Cooper is great in his scenes with Elsa Jansen as his mother. Their scenes together are wonderful, like the way that he's dominated by her, but also handling her, managing her.
Yeah, I mean, he knows what to say. He knows how to get around her to some extent. I mean, they have to go to some real extremes at times. Intercept her letters and put them in another envelope. And I don't know if that really happened, but it gets across the idea of how much they catered to her expectations.
But I mean, even just in their scenes together, the dynamic that they have between them, incesty in a very wholesome way. And I mean, Cooper is so great at that. It's reminiscent a little of, although in a very different tone, of Cary Grant and Ethel Barrymore.
In None But the Lonely Heart.
Yeah. Of course, they're more openly combative.
There is the big scene, and again, I'm sure this is a smoothed over version description of everything that was really going on in the biographical marriage.
Yeah, making it all about this
Schifferobe.
This one little incident over a schifferobe, after which everything was okay.
Ludwig Stossel takes him aside and he's like, I can't say anything, but, pay attention, boy. This is something, if you don't handle it right, no sex for you ever. And the message gets across.
When we watched that terrible Cole Porter biopic, the problem with dramatizing Cole Porter's life is that he never had... I'm not saying he never had any problems in his life. I'm sure there were issues in his childhood and his upbringing. Not to mention,
living as a gay man in a homophobic society.
Exactly. But he didn't have any portrayable hardships.
Right.
For a Hollywood movie, and he seemed to be, in real life, based on my cursory examination of his Wikipedia page, he seemed to be enjoying himself a lot, and even getting along very well with his beard wife, up until his accident. That seemed to be the big tragedy of his life. And so how would you actually create a narrative out of that? Well, maybe you couldn't while he was alive, but this story, that kind of is its narrative shape, because all these issues with Oedipal complexes are being glossed over. It looks like Lou Gehrig never had any serious problems in his whole life up until, his life is charmed up until this terrible disease.
Yeah. And it obviously didn't hurt that he gave that actual speech on radio. It's amazing.
The ending does have this major punch of pathos. Some of it is viewing him through Teresa Wright's perspective. We literally get a perspective shot of her as he walks into the stadium for the last time to give that speech. And other perspectives, like this semi-fictional little boy who learned to walk again because Gary Cooper hit the home runs for him. But I mean, the unspoken part of that is, you can't make everything better if you try. Obviously, if you just try. Some things that's not going to work for, but... the kid watching him walk away with tears in his eyes, feeling sorry for the hero. It's really I was thinking it's a kind of Hercules story. I mean, including the moment where all illness films have this moment, right? Where you get the first sign of it. And that happens while he's...
wrestling with his wife.
And she beats him fair and square, right? It's the Hercules pathos, right? The pathos of the strong man or the athlete who loses that. Hercules, Samson, whoever, right? There's a lot of pathos to that archetype.
Yeah, there is. If you look at Lou Gehrig's stats, I mean, he's amazing, and then all of a sudden he can't really play anymore. Horrifying just to look at in numerical terms, and when you know what was behind it, it's even more painful. The presence of all of those great Yankee ball players, really nice feature of the film too. Gives you a little time capsule or newsreel introduction to some of these characters. And Babe Ruth playing himself as an insincere glory hound is amazing. Love that he was willing to do that. I mean, he plays a heel in the movie. And he and Gehrig did famously wind up not seeing eye to eye and kind of leading opposite factions of the early 1930s Yankees as Ruth was starting to age out and Gehrig was becoming the most important player on the team. And you've got that echoed with the double act of Walter Brennan and Dan Duryea as the sports writers who each are sticking up for one side of this battle.
Yeah, but because Dan Duryea is playing the bad reporter, that's how you know how bad he is.
That's right.
And how wrong he is.
He and Babe Ruth are two peas in a pod.
Cynical.
Babe Ruth, sadly, I mean, his movie is just not nearly as good as Babe Ruth's story.
Well, maybe he should have died.
Well, he did in the late 40s, but he just didn't die nobly like this.
Noble hero of the people. Passive, naive Cooper character Walter Brennan is telling us the themes of the movie, right? This is America.
The same kind of boobs as Gehrig.
They're just good average people who aren't sleeping around.
They really softened Babe Ruth too, of course. I mean, what he was really doing was drinking and whoring all over the place, and when the manager tried to call him on it, he hung him out of the back of a train at one point.
So he was acting like a rock star, in other words. And Lou Gehrig was just the opposite number of this.
Yeah, and I mean, they were both amazing, but it must be said, again, as a baseball fan and baseball historian of sorts, I mean, no one will ever be as good as Babe Ruth. It's just absurd how much better he was than everyone else. And when you look at him, it's like, he does not look like an athlete. I don't understand how he was able to do these things. But he did. The record is there.
Watching a movie like this makes me ask questions like, what is athleticism? Is it just a genetic freak, or is there anything artful to it? The reason I was thinking that was on my mind was because we had watched The Red Shoes the night before seeing this one. And obviously ballet is very athletic, but there's also some je ne sais quoi of a great dancer, right? And is that true of a great baseball player, do you think?
A lot of it is absurd hand-eye coordination. It's like a ball traveling at 100 miles per hour looks like it's standing still to you. And that's not something you can teach.
Like the Matrix.
Because you have to, like, you can actually see how it's spinning and you know it's going to curve or not. Most people looking at that won't see that. But it takes a lot of practice, too. Even Babe Ruth had to practice and go through an apprenticeship. Lou Gehrig is being used as a symbol of someone who just applied himself, and his work ethic is unquestioned. Now let's have Leonard Maltin on the best years of our lives. He gives it 4 stars out of a possible 4. American classic of 3 veterans returning home after World War II, readjusting to civilian life. Robert Sherwood's script from McKinley Cantor's book perfectly captured the mood of post-war USA, still powerful today. 7 Oscars include Best Picture, director Wyler, Frederick March, Harold Russell was Best Supporting Actor, Robert Sherwood won, and Daniel Mandel's editing, so he also did the Pride of the Yankees. Hugo Friedhofer's score. Russell, an actual veteran who lost his hands, took home a 2nd Oscar, a special award for bringing hope and courage to other veterans. Remade as a TV movie, Returning Home. Never seen that. The director, William Wyler, and the cast list, Frederick March, Myrna Loy, Teresa Wright, Dana Andrews, Virginia Mayo, Harold Russell, Hoagie Carmichael, Gladys George, and Steve Cochran are the ones named here. There are certainly others that could have been.
Even Bosley Crowther liked it.
It's unanimous. I don't think I've ever talked to anyone or met anyone that didn't like this movie, if they'd seen it.
Well...
You don't like it?
No, I like it, but I have to admit that this movie is a little bit too adult for me. It's too grown up. I found it a little bit boring when I was younger.
But what about now? You are grown up.
I find it less boring. Yeah. I enjoyed it, but it's very, very grown up, and I'm not sure that I go to movies or any kind of art for that.
Interesting. I don't know. I loved it as a child, but of course I was often called a middle-aged man in teenager's clothing back then, and I've just grown into my middle-agedness.
I never agree with David Thompson on anything, but, well, actually, I do agree with him. I just hate the way he puts things. But apparently he has a contrarian response to Best Years. So he's quoted here on the Wikipedia page, offering tempered praise. I would concede that Best Years is decent and humane, acutely observed despite being so meticulous a package. It would have taken uncommon genius and daring at that time to sneak a view of an untidy or unresolved America past Goldwyn or the public. So this is curious because do you think that's true? Like the public... First of all, how could that be sneaked past the public? The public loved this movie. Like, how could anything... It seems to me that the public is just embracing what the movie is in fact doing. And as for Goldwyn, do we believe that he thought that there was, like, a perfectly rosy America? It was his idea to make this movie about the difficulty that veterans were having readjusting to civilian life, and Goldwyn seems to have been some kind of a leftist, much more so than most of the studio bosses, which would imply that he does not think that America is perfect and that it does need a lot of room for improvement.
I certainly don't think this movie shows America as a fait accompli. I mean, it's rife with problems, and we see them at every level of society.
It's not being sneaky, you know?
No.
Like, there are movies that might be sneaking a subversive message past the viewer, but this doesn't seem to be one of them.
Growing up, I often thought of this movie alongside Till the End of Time, and that is probably giving you a slightly seamier look at American society, at least whenever Robert Mitchum's on the screen. I mean, they're both going at the same problem. The other one might have a bit of a harsher edge of criticism to it, and that is what you'd expect from members of the Hollywood 10. But Best Years of Our Lives is, if anything, it's a call to America to try to be what it it says it is,
Right,
right?
sure.
A Jeremiah.
Well, yeah, specifically, very specifically, it is saying that you have to help the veterans.
Well, it's definitely saying that in every way possible. And the scenes at the bank, this is not Chamber of Commerce stuff here. This is not presenting the American businessman as a paragon. Frederick March is going to drink himself into a grave over every battle he has to lend money to a GI that is trying to buy a farm.
Yeah, and what about that? Like, what about Frederick March being drunk for the entire movie and looking so much like hell that the movie actually calls attention to it at one point?
Right, well, I referenced this a couple weeks ago when we were talking about But Not For Me,
Yeah.
where Clark Gable is forced to reckon with, his former beauty or whatever. But I mentioned there that I thought, that was very unusual for someone like Clark Gable to have to deal with on screen. Frederick March, I mean, he's a guy that I'm sure was delighted to have his face begin to sag and get a bit fucked up looking in middle age because he could use it, This is an actor's actor.
But he certainly does a convincing acting job of making you think that he's horrified when he's looking at the contrast in the mirror.
Aging sucks. I don't like it.
Myrna Loy, this has got to be the best use of her wife character ever. Her irony and her poise.
Yeah, it's right up there with Tess Pilot amongst her best performances, I think.
Her irony and her poise have never had more to deal with.
And she and Teresa Wright have a great mother-daughter relationship as they try to navigate around Frederick March's issues. I find this movie immensely entertaining. I'm interested in each of the stories. I do find it extremely emotionally powerful at times. The scenes with Harold Russell trying to reintegrate himself are remarkable. I mean, a non-actor, but what a performance he gives.
Yeah, it's an amazing performance considering that he is playing a character sort of based on himself. There's a very sad anecdote.
Oh, he had to sell his Oscar.
Yeah, in the Wikipedia page.
Yeah. So America didn't get any better.
He was given a special Oscar because nobody thought as a non-actor, he'd actually managed to win Best Supporting Actor, but then he did. But it did not set him up for life.
And of course, I mean, working with Wyler set him up for success in this film. Working with the actors that he played off of. And Kathy O'Donnell is terrific in this movie with him.
Yeah, obviously she has a very interesting look about her.
The ultimate girl next door, as portrayed in this film anyway. And she does live next door to Homer.
It's such a good performance, you could easily believe that she is a non-actor.
No, she's an expert actor.
But don't you agree? She contributes to the documentary feel?
Yeah.
It's interesting, not having seen this for a long time, I remembered Frederick March's scenes as being, like, his drunk scenes when he's dragging Myrna Loy and Teresa Wright around everywhere and being embarrassing. I remembered those as being darker.
Well, they would be darker if he didn't have Myrna Loy and Teresa Wright there to help him.
That's what I mean. I remember there being more tension for them than there is.
He says it himself. He's sorry for everyone else that doesn't have Myrna Loy. This is an amazing performance by Dana Andrews.
He gives a lot of those.
The scene where he has his nightmare is incredible and very vulnerable. We're still dealing with a time period where men were not encouraged to show their emotions. And I mean, he's full on crying at the end of that.
Yeah, true. Well, as is Harold Russell at the end of his sequence.
Yeah, no, these are very vulnerable male figures in this film.
The sequence with Kathy O'Donnell. Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, the revealing of his vulnerability is what that scene is all about.
Indeed.
Telling her that he's as helpless as a baby, and he has to... We've been talking about this a lot in noirs that we've been watching recently, which would be from right around this time period, but he has to be able to accept his dependency on her, right? Or else their relationship is not going to be able to function. He's not going to be able to have a relationship with anybody unless he accepts that he can be completely vulnerable with his wife.
It's a real problem. It's not a fanciful movie scenario, right? When you really see what he's talking about.
It's a problem of his masculinity, though. That is what's disturbing him.
And that's why he's spending all of his time shooting off guns in the garage. The movie guides him in the correct course. And Dana Andrews is the one that really pushes him to make that leap of faith. And of course, the fact that Wilma just keeps showing up, just like Lucille Ball in in the dark corner. It would have been easy for her to just go away as he asked her to do. She doesn't.
No, this is not the Enchanted Cottage. She definitely does still love him.
What about the scenes with Dana Andrews' broken down, drunken dad, Roman Bonin?
Yeah, well, that's very interesting, obviously, when we see where he comes from. I mean, his whole storyline, well, not his whole storyline, but much of his storyline, as far as his readjustment, is centered on this class-based contrast between what he was able to do in the army, how he, by his merit, rose to a position where he was respected and given responsibility, and now he has to go back into a world where, because his background, he can't do anything but, aspire to be a sales floor manager.
Yeah, assistant to Stinky Merrill.
Well, I mean, yeah, if he can put up with that contrast, having experienced the glamour as well as the horror of his war career, right? If he can put up with that contrast, maybe he can rise as high as Stinky. But obviously he cannot put up with that. And yet there's a certain vulnerability to Teresa Wright coming from this middle-class family. They accept each other. He is not ashamed of her meeting him in that department store,
No, that's a wonderful scene. I mean, it's really the linchpin of their developing relationship, I think. I mean, when you couple it with the fact that she was there for his nightmare and helped him through it in a way that no one else ever has.
Right.
But yeah, he's making jokes about vanishing cream.
and needing to make a sale so they can keep talking.
Yeah, on the clock here.
Because that's another form of male vulnerability in this movie, which is this class-based, coming from a lower class than the woman you aspire to. Virginia Mayo is thrown under the bus more than anyone else in this movie. Well, except maybe Stinky and the bank manager.
Ray Collins.
I think we are supposed to feel, speaking again of masculinity, I think we are supposed to feel that his masculinity is creating even more problems than they inherently have by him not allowing her to go to a job where she makes more money than he does, and also, sells sex, sells herself.
No, I agree. She has a right to be pissed off. I mean, their marriage sucks, and it's not her fault alone. I mean, she's contributing to it, and so is he.
They're incompatible. It was never going to work, but he's making it worse than it has to be, right?
Undoubtedly. I don't think the movie is hiding that. He's acting like an idiot around the house, and why would she stick by him when he's acting like this? I love Virginia Mayo. She's a very underrated actress. I mean, she was asked to play sex bombs a lot in the 40s, but, she could bring as much nuance to the part as she needed to. This role, I mean, she's just playing it to the hilt. This is not an accident that she is so grating in the scenes. Like when she's telling him to just snap out of it and look on the bright side and stop having PTSD. It's an amazing scene.
Yeah, she's not a deep person, and presumably neither was he before the war.
He was a soda jerk who all of a sudden found himself in a spiffy officer's uniform and was able to get
a hot girl.
Yeah.
And that was all he aspired to at the time.
Yeah, and then he went overseas and saw hell and saw all of the men that he grew to be fond of burned alive in the air by little black flowers that grow in the sky. That's a phrasing I've always remembered since the first time I saw it, when she asked him, "What are those things?"
But I mean, there's also that it's played with a very different tone. But there's also the scene in Love Letters where Joseph Cotton's superficial socialite fiancé basically tells him to snap out of it when he comes back from the war, right?
Yeah.
He also needs a deeper girl at that point. It's going to be Jennifer Jones rather than Teresa Wright, though.
But you see the GI that is having no trouble getting readjusted. Steve Cochran, excellent actor in his own right, who would graduate to larger parts, mostly as a slime ball. Contrasting presentations of the returned hero.
Well, yes, sure, you're going to be fine if you're a sociopath.
But that scene is more understated than you're expecting it to be. Every time I see this movie, I think, do they get into a fight here? But no, they don't. They just trade a few verbal jabs and that's it. And then the marriage is over, and I mean, he walks out and he's planning to leave town. Dana Andrews does get to throw a punch at a Nazi, of course, at the drugstore, and that's a very satisfying scene. This customer wasn't right. He loses his job over it. And I mean, that scene is every bit as much a reflection of the movie's politics as the scene in Till the End of Time, where Mitchum and Guy Madison get into the fight fight with the Klansmen, basically, or
Yeah.
the John Birchers at the bar. This is a pro-Nazi guy that's trying to rev himself up to make a speech and telling Homer that he lost his hands for nothing fighting fascism. Movie's not going to have any of that.
Yeah, Homer doesn't really articulate any politics there. He's just outraged that this man is saying that all of his friends died for nothing.
Yeah.
But Dana Andrews knows what's what.
He does, yeah.
Well, let's talk more about Frederick March's trajectory, and particularly... Well, first of all, the scene with his son is interesting.
Thanks very much for these things, Dad.
He discovers his son is a nerd, right? Who isn't interested in racism. Like, everybody has already moved far beyond that, apparently.
Yeah, thankfully. I don't know. I would be like that kid. If my dad came home and gave me a bloody flag, I'd be, oh, thanks, Dad.
Not only that, but the concern of his generation is nuclear war, like absolute
Armageddon.
Absolute obliteration of the human race.
Hoagie Carmichael also alludes to it while playing at his piano. Well, maybe there'll be another war, and then none of us will have to worry about any of this.
It's Frederick March as the returning veteran who seems naive compared to what's been going on at home. Like, it's just so disorienting for him that all of a sudden, in his mind, the good guy, bad guy fight is still happening.
Yeah.
Right? The very naive but true enough terms, if you minus the racism, in which that particular war was fought. But at home, the children are dealing with much more complex ideas in a new society that's been shaped by the war. And the movie is not making fun of this teenage boy.
No, definitely not. Saying, and Dad, you better start thinking about these things.
A lot of their readjustments are about, and it's interesting and it's subtle. The idea that society has changed so much as a result of the war while they've been away, but as a result of other things too, and everything that was so relevant to saving their lives and ending Nazism and saving the lives of all of their fellow soldiers has no meaning in this world that they've returned to. Like when Frederick March is talking about, how do I know that I can give this guy a loan? Well, actually, there are concrete reasons. I have skills. And it's not just that you should be doing it anyway, or someone should be doing it, the government should be doing it, the government shouldn't just be paying half of it. I actually have reliable skills that save lives in this area.
Yeah.
But it's immaterial. That doesn't have any application to the capitalist financial world outside of the war. Taking risks. We don't want any taking risks anymore.
That involves risks for this bank. But no, I mean, his speech says we're going to give away so many loans, people will think we're gambling with the depositors' money. And we will be.
Gambling on the fucking future that will not exist if we don't do that.
I mean, it's a pretty incredible scene, his drunken speech that winds up going well, because it hits upon the exact right note at the end, almost as if by accident. But, I mean, the way March plays it, it's teetering on the verge of becoming a Norman Maine public spectacle.
Well, yeah, and you see Myrna Loy reacting to it that
counting
way.
Every drink with her fork on the tablecloth. It's so good. So many nice little touches. And of course, the camera work by Greg Toland is unparalleled as always. You see all kinds of great uses of deep focus. The one that people always talk about, the scene at Butch's bar where you can really see everything that's going on with Dana Andrews in the phone booth. And he's way at the back corner of the room while the conversation is going on in the foreground. And that's not something that was possible before Greg Toland made his innovations.
And we should talk, because he's talking to Teresa Wright in that moment, we should talk about the shockingly adult statements about relationships in this movie, right? That are also often pointed to. Teresa Wright telling her parents, I'm going to break up that marriage.
I mean, nobody played this kind of character as well as Teresa Wright. It really is a Bildungsroman for her. She's progressing rapidly from stage to stage to the point where she is a fully fledged adult by the end.
Yeah, but I mean, the innovation of the scene is that this is not something that a good girl should be declaring.
No, but, you know, she's always been a little bit more aware of what's going on in the world than your stereotypical good girl in a movie anyway. I love that scene where she's trying to help drunken Dana Andrews get to bed, and he asks her name and she says Peggy, and he's like, "Oh, Peggy."
And then he grabs her,
she's
pulls
like,
her,
"I'm not that Peggy."
pulls her down. Yeah, but she's amused.
Yeah, exactly. She's really wry
Yeah.
at dealing with, and he asks her if he got out of line, and she says, "Well, not too bad."
But this is what I mean, like, Teresa Wright is always being used as the good girl type who has an unexpected twist, and I mean, you know that this is a model for a lot of David Lynch characters, starting with Blue Velvet. In the same scene, Myrna Loy's declaration of what marriage is.
Yeah, hating each other a lot of the time,
and
falling in love all over again.
How many times have I hated you and meant it in the depth of my heart, or however she says it, it's really deadly.
How many times have I said I hated you and meant it? Yeah.
Felt it in the depth of my heart. And how many times have you said that I'm sick to death of you? And we're all washed up.
Yeah, they really don't sugarcoat that relationship.
Probably the most romantic, most passionate description I have ever heard of a lifelong middle-class marriage. The old-fashioned kind.
Does Janine Basinger go into that one in her book?
Well, she mentions the speech, but unfortunately the book doesn't go into depth with much of anything.
That's too bad.
I don't know if I buy that as a justification of the old-fashioned type of marriage, where you just have to stay in it. Or maybe I buy it too well as a justification. I don't know. It's a romanticization of that type of marriage that happens. And I mean, if people get married and have children, this is the best that they're also hoping for, right? Where you are going to have to stay in it even when you desperately do not want to. You are going to, at best, you are going to hate each other and fall in love over again. At second best, you're going to hate each other, and at third best, you are just going to become indifferent and contemptuous.
Well, the movie shows us that possibility as well, and Dana Andrews and Virginia Mayo calling it quits, and the movie certainly doesn't think they should have stuck it out and tried to fall in love all over again.
No, but the problem here that's being illustrated is marriage itself, like two people who are compatible, who are intelligent, who want the same things. Even they, and all the more so they. If there is intelligence there, all the more so are they going to have periods where they hate each other.
Yeah, it's tough.
And, when you have serious problems, like you and I will never have a serious I hope we don't, because the only thing it could be is illness, right? But anyone who raises children has serious problems there with the children, with their relationship. Right.
That's an extra stressor for sure. We could certainly talk much longer about Best Years of Our Lives, and we could have talked about each of these movies longer, no doubt, but let us turn our attention to My Foolish Heart and Leonard Maltin. He gives it 3 stars out of a possible 4. Deftly handled sentimental World War II romance tale between soldier Andrews and Hayward. Victor Young's lovely theme helps. Based on J.D. Salinger's story Uncle Wiggily in Connecticut, the only one of the author's works ever adapted to film. The director was Mark Robson, and the cast list: Dana Andrews, Susan Hayward, Kent Smith, Lois Wheeler, Jesse Royce Landis, Robert Keith, Gigi Perrault.
Well, what Maltin omits there is that the reason this is the only Salinger story ever adapted to film is because he hated it so much that he would never allow anything of his to be adapted again. I'm glad Maltin likes it, though, because everything I read on the internet was that it was critically derided at the time and ever since.
Yeah, I love this movie. I think it's amazing.
Do you know who was originally supposed to play the Susan Hayward part?
I can't imagine anyone doing it better than her.
Oh, well, no, neither can I. It's a fantastic performance, but this would have been very interesting. Teresa Wright.
Yeah.
So that would have been a really interesting twist on Good Girl with a Twist.
I was a nice girl, wasn't I?
Yeah. What a meaty role that would have been for her. The reason it didn't come about is because I'm getting this from cursory internet research, so I don't know if I have the details right, but it seems that Teresa Wright was a very intelligent and very strong-willed young actress, like the part she played, and she gave Goldwyn trouble, and they had a falling out. She wasn't being cooperative.
Was it during Enchantment?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that movie, but it's not much of a role for her. It's just kind of a one-note Victorian angel part.
And so she left and lived to regret it, because never again would she get the quality of movies or pay that she had with Goldwyn.
Yeah, I know. It is too bad. Now, in this case, I think we needed Susan Hayward in this role, but I certainly wish Teresa Wright had stuck it out with Goldwyn. Yeah, her 50s filmography is disappointing after what she was able to do in the 40s. Now, Susan Hayward is just beginning her ascent. She's already made Smash Up the Story of a Woman, so that was like 1947. And here, again, this one didn't really help her, I guess, because nobody liked it at the time and nobody went to see it, and J.D. Salinger hated it, but it didn't put the brakes on her momentum either, because the 1950s really were Susan Hayward's decade.
This is a great, great performance. This is an adult movie that's wrapped up in the burrito of a soap opera, right? Rather than just being a straight-out adult movie like Best Years of Our Lives. You've read the Salinger story. Why do you think he hated this so much?
It's hard to say. I don't know if I really understand J.D. Salinger. I mean, I like his work more than I did when I was a teenager, actually. I kind of rejected Catcher in the Rye when I read it.
Yeah, me too. We were just being contrarian, but yeah, I did too, violently.
There's not that much there in the story, right? It's a nice story, for sure, but it's really just some of the stuff that you get in the framing sequence. The drunken Susan Hayward talking to her friend. The dynamics there have changed somewhat because the friend is not a rival in love for Kent Smith the way she is in the movie. Some of the dialogue is straight out of there. I was a nice girl, wasn't I? Is the last line of the story. There's an allusion to her being caught in the elevator with a soldier. It doesn't even mention that was Walt.
He just thought that this story about a woman who becomes pregnant out of wedlock with a soldier was stupid.
It's similar in a way to what Universal did with The Killers, the Hemingway story, because it's just a very short, almost like a tiny one-act play, and they made a whole backstory to go with that scene. And similarly, that's what the Epstein brothers did here. I think they did a tremendous job of fleshing out that character. She's supposed to be even less likable in the Salinger story. I mean, it just plays up the racist aspects of her classism as well, and she makes all kinds of gross comments about the maid. It doesn't ever show her being a nice girl in any way or being nice. This movie clearly wants to get inside that head and take it seriously. What's the trajectory for this character? And to show that, I guess, was kind of violating what Salinger was trying to do, which was talk about a self-pitying asshole.
I guess, but yeah, how are you going to flesh that out into a whole movie? It's common for critics to have contempt for this type of story, dismissed as a soap opera about a woman who gets pregnant out of wedlock. The hilarious thing being that this happened to and happens to many, many women, and many, many women could identify with this story.
Yeah, it'll change your life if this happens to you, that's for sure.
Yeah, or could identify with the fear of it happening if it did not happen to them, No,
I think it's a remarkable movie.
Yeah, and it has a literary tone to it, right? It has more of a wry and adult tone than is usual for a Hollywood movie of the period.
It's written by the Epsteins, one of the great screenwriting duos of the era, responsible for so much of my favorite content at Warner Brothers, and they really bring their A game to this one, I think. They punctuate the screenplay with a few of the most deathless Uncle Wiggily in Connecticut lines, but most of it's original to them. And Walt is entirely, a creation of theirs, right? Because in the story, all we know about him is, the comment that he made her laugh. That's it. There's nothing about him. Anything else about his behavior.
So the basic story is Susan Hayward falling in love with this man who's crashing a party in order to pick up girls. So this quite superficial man, played by Dana Andrews, and she is very naive and in her own way superficial, but a good girl, a nice girl. And she falls in love with him instantly, this older man. It was kind of similar in a way to the backstory of Susan Parrish, although that movie goes in a very different direction. And so she's spending this whole time wondering, and we are also wondering, if Dana Andrews is really in love with her. Is he going to eventually prove it by deciding to marry her, even though he's full of so much ennui about the war that he's hesitant to do that, right? It is a soap, it is a fantasy, but as I said, that intermingles with so many of the real lives and fantasies of real women.
And the friendship between these two women is unexpectedly poignant. I mean, it really gets me at the end.
Yeah, okay, well, we'll talk about that. But, yeah, and it's not supposed to be. It doesn't seem like it's going to be initially, or for most of the movie, considering what Hayward does to her friend.
Yeah.
And also, there's this whole relationship with her parents fleshed out.
It's wonderful. Robert Keith is so good in this movie as the ultimate dad, really. I mean, he does everything he can to see things from her perspective and help her.
Yeah, the parents aren't like the parents in Susan Parrish. Well, I mean, he is.
Yeah, Lloyd Nolan, is in that lineage for sure.
But again, so this is... The parents serve an important role because, like, a primary thing that a woman in her position would be worrying about is...
Everyone thinking about it the way her mother does.
Well, about how her parents are going to react and about whether she can rely on them for anything.
Right, and it turns out she can, until her dad's heart trouble sinks them all.
Yeah, exactly. There's... Of course, a lot of poignancy in the sequence where her father talks about the two of them going off on a vacation together, escaping from her mother. Obviously wants to retreat into an earlier version of their relationship where he was her number one boy.
She loves his jokes. Nobody else laughs at his jokes.
But when he realizes that no, he's been replaced in her heart by a man who's not her father, he supports that, but there is that little moment, like he fully supports that. He supports her to go back to New York and be able to continue this relationship, this very precarious relationship. But there's that moment of pathos when we see the sacrifice he's making, like a miniature version of the end of late spring.
Yeah, sure, exactly. I was picturing him getting home to Boise and
peeling an apple.
Or peeling a potato, maybe in Idaho would be more apt. How about the role played by the abandoned Kent Smith in this film?
That's the name of a Facebook group.
It is. People know and care about Kent Smith out there. I think he always adds something to a film.
I feel like he's a little bit ill-served in this one.
I think he gets some nice opportunities.
Well, actually, the scene in the car where
exactly.
Where she hooks him. The structure of the movie is so that we're waiting and we see it coming in advance, right? Waiting for her to betray her friend. And then in the moment where she actually does it, it's a beautifully played scene between her and Ken Smith. And you can see she really doesn't have any other choice.
No, not really.
How she is not the nasty bitch.
No.
That she's portrayed as, in the opening scene.
Right, well, that she's portrayed herself as, right? I mean, she's drinking herself into a fine stew of self-hatred out in Connecticut there.
And she's even rejected this child that is the only thing left over from this love.
It's true.
And she says that she's decided in her own mind that the child is like the father who raised her, so maybe she is.
So much of this movie, maybe this is part of what people don't like about it or didn't like about it, I don't know. It does focus a lot on her salvation being a return to her responsibilities as a mother. I don't know. In this movie, for me, it works.
Well, I mean, the ending is completely unrealistic, and that's not a problem of the movie. It's daring, right? The fact that she has this flashback and then is cured, right?
Yeah, her drunken viciousness.
It's like they won't believe me, but with a happy ending. Just understands herself now.
Yeah, I mean, this is what all of us need, a revelatory flashback, and so few of us get it, unfortunately. I agree with you. I think this is a plus of the film because it all works beautifully, almost as if it really was planned out originally by the person that designed the story. But clearly J.D. Salinger did not agree with that statement and had other intentions.
Right, and when she repeats the Uncle Wiggily line for her child, it's the final piece falling into place, right? Where she discovers the love that she does have for the child and she stops rejecting her. Yeah, that was definitely a moment. I've been doing a lot of crying with all of these movies in the Powell Pressburgers, and that definitely is the moment where I tear up there. And then also when her friend comes in and says that we realize that the child belongs with you. And the movie fools you because when she starts talking about where she says fine, I'm not going to try to hurt people anymore. You can take my child, that she deserves to be with you two, not with me.
Yeah, it could be like a Stella Dallas.
I'm being punished. I'm being punished for what I did then. You think that these words have been written into her mouth to satisfy the production code, so nobody has to die. But then it turns out that the movie completely defies the production code because she has a happy ending.
She's not alone in her room with her demons like Betty Davis in The Little Foxes.
The thing that she's supposed to be punished for under the code is having a child out of wedlock, having sex out of wedlock. Every now and then a movie just completely flouts the production code, and I don't understand. We can never understand how.
She hated herself for a long time.
It's usually not satisfactory. Usually being deprived of your child, or the child dies, or you die. Maybe Dana Andrews dying was enough, but normally it's not.
What an amazing performance by Dana Andrews in this movie too, I think. It's really, and not obviously as crucial to the film as Susan Hayward.
Maybe it's a little bit like his Fallen Angel character.
I agree.
Which he hated, apparently, but...
But he's so good at it, right?
But in this movie, even more so, more realistically, he just slowly drifts into some kind of moral focus based on Susan Hayward. I mean, it's based on a terrible gender cliche, but based on her forcing him to take her seriously and not just as another notch on his bedpost.
It's a very long scene with them together in his apartment, and it's a real roller coaster because she resists his passes, and then he finally admits, well, yeah, of course that's why I brought you up here.
And he tries to do the routine of, I've wined and dined you, and you ought to know what you're getting into when you come back to a guy's apartment, and now you're shortchanging me.
Right, but he doesn't get any more gross than that. She says, no, I'm not doing this, but I'm sad that this means, and he says, well, then I'll take you home. And she's like, no, if you take me home, then you're really going to be pissed off because you lost your whole night and had to put in all this other effort and you didn't even get to have sex. And that somehow helps him turn the corner as well, because when she comes back, he doesn't want what he used to want. And of course, all of this happening in one long scene is maybe not how it usually works in real life, but it's a beautiful distillation of the way feelings can change.
Oh, I'd say that this sort of thing happens in real life, that sometimes you can have a long scene in which your feelings change.
But not as expertly as this is structured in most of our day-to-day lives. We also get Uncle Wiggily coming up there. A lot of things come into play in that scene. And by the end of it, they're on a completely different trajectory, although not headed for marriage, certainly right away, or maybe ever, because there's so much other uncertainty playing around at the edges of their lives. The scene where he's writing that letter to her and then it's just amazing. I love it. And what's on that letter is beautiful. This is a movie that I didn't see when I was a kid. I didn't see it until I was able to get a hold of it through the internet. I mean, it really took me by surprise because it had, as you say, no reputation whatsoever.
Which is the scene where I think it's after she comes back from seeing her parents and she goes to that party with Kent Smith.
And Mary Jane.
Yeah,
played by Lois Wheeler, whom I don't know at all, but she was great in this movie.
And what's going on between her and Kent Smith where she just starts crying for a moment? There's just this shot of Susan Hayward by Mark Robson, close-up of her face where she lowers her eyes and, remembering her situation for a moment, which she certainly can't tell Kent Smith about.
No.
Remembering Dana Andrews' death, and 2 tears come out of her eyes. Moment of extraordinary pain that I thought was like a tremendous moment by Susan Hayward.
I mean, she really is a great actress.
It's funny, she's not a great beauty, but she has a kind of starlet appearance that undercuts how, it makes you not take her seriously, right? It undercuts how effective an actress she really is.
Oh, I guess so. I mean, something was going wrong for her for a long time. I'd like to read a biography. I think there must be one. Like, what was happening? Why was Hollywood misusing her for so long? We've talked about this. She shows up from the late 30s onward, usually as a bitchy other woman.
She's actually used effectively in They Won't Believe Me.
Well, yeah, but that's getting late in the 40s again, where she's starting to be taken more seriously by the studios. But, as late as And Now Tomorrow, the 1944 film, I mean, she's got a very tertiary role as a jerkish sister of the protagonist. She's even worse in I Married a Witch. So Paramount really just didn't use her well. Or I guess they used her well because, you've got a star quality performer in a minor role. And she was able to go with that and do interesting things with it. But, I mean, she needed to be the focus of movies the way she is here.
I'm really looking forward to seeing I Can Get It For You Wholesale.
Yeah, me too.
Her Abraham Polonsky screenplay movie, his Marxist feminist movie.
It's going to be great.
So is that it? For Goldwyn, how do you want to wrap up talking about Samuel Goldwyn Productions?
I'm a big fan.
His ideas are so sophisticated that there's really some strange aporia between the way he is presented.
Yeah, and the documentary does not handle it well. It just leaves it as an aporia. Everyone talks about how inarticulate he is.
And is he sort of presented early on as this weird, crass salesman type?
Unmarriageable. Like, not even really human the way all these other people are talking about him. And somehow he makes these
incredibly literate movies with very innovative ideas and being willing to hire intellectuals, basically, which is not something that the studios really wanted to do ever.
No, and when they did, they often interfered with them, and he doesn't seem to have done that. We heard about him wanting to tack on that scene in Wuthering Heights or whatever, but for the most part, he lets people like Robert Sherwood and Dorothy Parker and Lillian Hellman do what they want to do. And it gets onto the screen, and it's amazing. It's quite a legacy.
I just wish that he had made that love story written by Sigmund Freud. I wish Freud had gone ahead with that.
Yeah, me too. Time for Fear and Moviegoing in Toronto. We do have all of the films made by the Archers on our schedule within the next couple of years, so we're not going to go into great depth here. But I think we should register our quick impressions of our first 3 films, and that's The Red Shoes, Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, and I Know Where I'm Going. One small complaint I feel the need to make here is that, I'm delighted, elated that we are getting this Powell and Pressburger retrospective at all, but why couldn't they be showing The Small Back Room, one of my absolute favorites of their films, and it's not there.
You did just remind me, though, that since COVID, since lockdown, and its terrible disruption of the economic system, although not disrupted enough, we've been complaining about TIFF's programming, and I would like to say that they have really turned a corner this year. Maybe some of our listeners would like to know about the weird system that TIFF is operating under now, however, that makes getting tickets and going to screenings very adventurous, which is we get a dual membership for an incredibly low price, and then the actual screenings, however many we can get to, are free. The problem being that everybody being in the same position, the tickets are snapped up immediately, and then it's a crapshoot waiting for people to drop out to decide they're not coming for us to
snap up whatever tickets are returned, because they go on sale in the middle of the workday for both of us, and I really can't do anything during my workday.
It doesn't matter, though, because we've heard people complain as we sit in the seats waiting for the movie to begin. We've heard other members complain that they can be on that website the second the movies go up and they're still sold out immediately. So then we are getting whatever tickets we can. We are not sitting together, and sometimes the seats are very bad and we have to toss up who's going to get the worst seat. Still, the programming, we do appreciate the low membership price, and we do this year appreciate the programming.
I'm not going to complain about any of that.
It's just very weird.
It's like a video game. We have eventually gotten tickets to everything we wanted. You just have to be on the lookout. And yeah, we can't sit together sometimes, which is sad. But then we get back together as we leave the cinema, and we aren't permitted to talk about these movies anyway until we get on mic. So
by you.
All right, let's give our quick hits on Red Shoes, Elise. This one you know well, right?
Sure, yeah.
They led off with this movie. I guess it's the most famous, the most lauded of the Powell Pressburger collaborations.
I've always felt it's a very hard movie to watch, which is interesting because if it's the most popular. I find it a very hard movie to watch. I find it to be as much of a feminist horror movie as Backstreet, despite the lovely Technicolor and the imaginative dance sequence that builds on Busby Berkeley anti-realism. That said, I remember it being characterized when I first watched it when I was much younger as a conflict between love and art. Straightforward feminist message about the position that female artists are put in. But when I was watching it this time, it seemed to me that everybody's position of the three main characters is much more ambiguous. And it also struck me because I hadn't seen... This is the first time I've viewed it since watching Gone to Earth. How similar that other heroine-centric Powell Pressburger movie is in that there's a woman who is put by gender into an untenable position and is torn between two men who each have their vision of what she should be, right?
Yeah, that's true. And Anton Walbrook is playing a character that's not too dissimilar from the evil squire.
Except that he has refused sexuality and the squire is doing the opposite.
Well, that's true. To me, this movie, you can view it through so many lenses, but the more I've seen it, the more I feel like the movie is insisting more than anything on Anton Walbrook's perspective on things and his growing self-knowledge.
He's the protagonist.
Yeah, he really is. I mean, and that's why it ends with him having an absolute fit, announcing that they're going to put on the red shoes with no leading lady because he's killed her. I mean, and it's an incredible performance by Walbrook. Furthest thing from a one-note sneering villain. I mean, he's never as aloof as he wants to be throughout the movie, and he makes all kinds of weird faux pas, like the party joke that he makes about how they avoided having to see a dancing exhibition.
Do you want me to give my psychological take on what's going on with him, or do you want me to save that for when we actually do the movie?
Give us a little teaser of it and we'll move to the next film.
Just that it seemed to me on this viewing, maybe this is extremely obvious to everybody, this is the first time I thought of it, that he fucks up with her so badly because he's in love with her, but he will not let himself pursue that because of this idea about art that he's also imposing on her.
Well, I agree with you. I don't know if this is generally agreed upon, but we'll talk about it more maybe when we do the podcast. You can research and see if we're just in the critical mainstream on that. Life and Death of Colonel Blimp. This is the first Powell and Pressburger movie I saw when I was a kid. I taped it off TV, and I just couldn't believe such a movie existed. I watched it over and over and over again. It never ceases to amaze me. I can't believe I finally saw it on the big screen.
What does Colonel Blimp represent in terms of a representation, a wartime representation of England? Give us the nutshell version, Dave.
It's a famously embattled film, right? Churchill did everything he could to suppress it. Colonel Blimp, the cartoon character, is much more of a caricature of an upper-class British Army officer.
So is this like My Foolish Heart, kind of trying to attach meaningful backstory to a cartoon-like character?
Yeah, well, I think it just takes its departure from that name, Colonel Blimp, but nothing else about this character, Clive Wynne Candy, has any relation to the cartoon character. But the idea, from what I understand, is just to show an old guard army officer who is an intelligent man and a very humane man. They're not caricaturing him. They're showing him as someone who is out of touch with the realities of World War II as they saw it. But
are we supposed to believe somehow this naivety represents something valuable about the British character, as we're supposed to believe that about Lou Gehrig in Pride of the Yankees?
I think they're agnostic about that. They're just saying this is a character. It does make him lovable in a way, but also horrifying. I mean, this is a movie that I can love despite the fact that every time you turn around, he's killing animals off screen and throwing them on the wall. But the movie makes clear that this is a product of his horrific loss of sense of purpose. Whenever he doesn't know what to do with himself, he goes and kills animals. This is a judgment upon him in a way, right? This is the sporting life, the life that he's been leading as a gentleman and an officer entails murder around the globe of people and of animals whenever he does not have something better to occupy himself.
I don't know if it's agnostic, though, because the wiser people in the movie do love him.
They love him, but they tell him he's got to change. So I think that's a very fair perspective on things.
The second Deborah Carr tells him to never change.
Yeah, but she's the least interesting Deborah Carr. I mean, sadly, that's the one he got to marry. And Deborah Carr, and this is the first time I saw her in a movie, and a lifelong love affair began in my mind.
Well, we're going to have to talk more about all of that.
For me, the reason I love the movie, it's not because it's giving the British Army pointers on how to prosecute World War II. What stands out about this movie is its incredible evocation of loss and memory and obsession with youth. This is one of the greatest works of art that deals with that subject. Anton Walbrook, also remarkable in the movie, but that's kind of a given.
Yeah, what a different performance.
Yeah, and I Know Where I'm Going.
I saw this for the first time with you.
This is another one that showed on TV not long after Colonel Blimp, and I cherished it as well. I had it on VHS tape and watched it over and over.
This is an incredibly effective love story in which the Hebrides serve as a pathetic fallacy for the romance.
Yes, they get involved for sure.
And the woman is just about unbearable, but that becomes wrapped up, and also her moral trajectory becomes wrapped up in this passion. It almost has more of a feel of Wuthering Heights than any Wuthering Heights movie, in a way.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, it's less... People are much nicer to each other for the most part in this movie.
Well, she's not very nice, is she?
No, but she's not cruel. She's thoughtless quite often.
Yeah, but the good people of the islands, the wise people of the islands, they understand her.
They give her some slack, for sure. Certainly Roger does. And, I mean, these two movies alone really should put him in the pantheon. Amazing actor that isn't very well known, I'm afraid.
Well, no, but it's the woman who lets him know what's what, and it also has a nice scene with the heroine. We better get the actor name.
Well, Pamela Brown is that's a great performance, yeah.
And who's the main character?
Well, Wendy Hiller, the great Wendy Hiller, is our protagonist, yes.
Climax of the film with the reading of the curse and how the exploration of this structure, how the atmosphere of that contributes to this anagnoresis, where everything falls into place with their feelings. That's just so dramatically effective. And I found myself crying again. I certainly cried at the ending of The Red Shoes.
These are very emotional experiences, and we've got 6 more to come. So future episodes, you can count on a little bit more Powell and Pressburger talk through May and into June. I think that's going to do it for this episode. Next week, we return to the Lily Palmer Acturist Oeuvre Review. We're going to be talking about The Miracle of the White Stallions and Torpedo Bay. I have no idea what we're going to get with these. I think there are more Nazis to be opposed in them, and so we'll add to that tally for Lily. And
hasn't she defeated them all yet?
Unfortunately, they're still crawling out of the woodwork.